I'm 73 years old now, and there are mornings when I wake up, make my tea, and the sun touches the old lace curtains just right, and for a moment, everything feels like peace. But some memories don't sleep quietly. Some stay tucked inside a drawer you never open until one day. You do. There's a photo on my kitchen shelf. A little girl with skinned knees, missing a tooth, grinning so wide you'd think the world had only ever been kind to her. That was me before I learned that sometimes the monsters don't hide under the bed. Sometimes they sit at your dinner table. For most of my life, I carried this story in silence. I wore it like an invisible coat, heavy-stitched with fear, shame, and guilt. Even my children never knew the full truth. I didn't speak of it at church. I didn't write it down. I thought silence meant strength. But now I know healing begins with truth. So if you're listening to this now, maybe it's because you carry something too. A bruise that didn't show a memory you buried so deep it echoes. This story is for you. It's a story of betrayal, but also of survival. Of losing everything, but finding something stronger in its place. My name is Eleanor May Hart, and this is how I became the woman I am, by surviving the family that tried to break me. When I was a little girl, I thought my house was the center of the world. It wasn't much. Just a white clapboard cottage tucked between rustling poplars and a gravel road in a little town in West Virginia. But it had a wraparound porch with a green swing that creaked like an old lullaby, and when I sat on that swing, legs dangling, arms stretched wide, I felt like a princess. No more than that. I felt safe. My name was Eleanor May back then, just Eleanor to the neighbors. My daddy called me Ellie Girl, and when he said it, I believed I was the most special child to ever walk this earth. He smelled like pipe tobacco and engine grease, always had cracked knuckles from working at the sawmill, but those hands were gentle with me. Mama was quieter, thin, tired, always folding laundry or humming hymns while scrubbing the stove. She had the kind of face that held stories she didn't tell. I was the youngest of 5. My brothers, Dean, Harold, and twins Carl and Clay were all older by a good bit. Mama said I was her late blessing, and Daddy called me his second wind. I don't know what the others thought of me, really. They were already boys turning into men when I was just learning to braid my own hair. But I loved them anyway, all of them, even when they ignored me, even when they teased me, because that's what families do, right? You love, you forgive, you trust, even when you shouldn't. I was 9 the summer everything started to shift. It came in slow like a fog over the hills, quiet, hard to name. That year, Daddy's work at the mill started drying up. He came home later, drank more, didn't laugh as loud. The nights got louder in our house, slamming doors. Mama's muffled crying behind the pantry wall, shouting that ended in silence. The kind that presses on your chest like wet wool. Then came the long hauls. Daddy picked up trucking shifts out of state. Just temporary, he'd say, tousling my hair. I'll be back before you miss me. But he'd be gone for 2-3 weeks at a time. When he was gone, things changed. It wasn't anything big at first, just how the boys looked at me. The way Carl, the quieter twin, lingered at the bathroom door. How Harold would accidentally brush past me in the hallway a little too close. The way Dean sat too close on the sofa, touching my knee without needing to. I didn't know how to name it. I was just a child, but I knew it made me feel cold, like my swing on a day with no sun. I still remember the first time I told Mama something felt wrong. It was a Thursday. I was sitting on the porch swing, legs tucked up under my nightgown, trying to read my Nancy Drew book. Carl had pinched me earlier, right on the inside of my thigh, said it was a joke. But the bruise bloomed like a purple flower. Mama, I whispered as she hung laundry. Do you think he's mad at me? She didn't look up, just shook a wet sheet and pinned it to the line. Don't be silly, Ellie, she said. Your brothers love you. Maybe you're just being too sensitive again. Too sensitive. That phrase followed me like a stray dog. I started to wonder if maybe I was. Maybe I imagined things. Maybe I was just silly. But I started locking my bedroom door. I started staying out late in the chicken shed just to avoid being inside. I started hiding, and still no one seemed to see. The moment that changed everything came a few months later. October. The leaves were red fire crackling underfoot. Daddy had been gone 3 weeks. Mama had gone into town to help the pastor's wife clean out the church pantry. She left a roast in the oven and told me to mind the boys. They're your brothers, she said. You'll be just fine. I wasn't. That night, I remember the hallway smelled like soap and cornbread and something sour like fear. Dean cornered me first, then the others followed. What happened next is something I still struggle to name. There are words for it now, words people use on court documents and newspaper headlines in whispered support groups held in church basements. But when you're a child, there are no words. Only pain. Only silence. Only confusion wrapped in shame. Afterwards, I lay curled up on the bathroom floor, my knees pulled to my chest. I stared at the ceiling and tried to think of my swing, tried to pretend I was floating somewhere else, somewhere safe. They told me not to tell. It was just play, and Harold said, "You liked it." Carl laughed. "You tell Mama, she'll say you asked for it. You know how she gets." And maybe they were right. Maybe Mama would say that. She never asked why I stopped eating, why I flinched when touched, why I started sleeping in the root cellar with the lantern on all night. She didn't ask. And I didn't tell. I was 10 when I stopped being a child. 10 when I learned how quiet a girl has to be to survive. I kept my hair short. I wore my brother's hand-me-downs. I learned how to disappear into corners. But none of it stopped them. They came when Mama was gone, when the windows were dark, when my voice was weakest. Sometimes it was one, sometimes two. I don't remember how many times. I don't want to. The hardest part wasn't the bruises or the fear. It was the betrayal. The way Harold used to lift me on his shoulders when I was small. The way Carl sang lullabies to me when I had nightmares. The way Dean once threatened a schoolboy who called me names. They were supposed to protect me. Instead, they destroyed me. Then came the blood. One day I was sweeping the front porch when it poured down my legs, red, angry, thick. I fainted in the flower bed. Mama found me an hour later, face down in the dirt. They rushed me to the doctor. There were questions, concerned looks, medical words too big for my ears. I heard the doctor say damage internal, not from a fall. Mama's hands trembled on the steering wheel all the way home. She didn't look at me, didn't ask. She just said, "You'll keep your mouth shut. You'll say it was a playground accident." And that's when I knew. She did know. She always had. That night I didn't sleep. I lay staring at the ceiling, listening to the tick of the clock, the groan of floorboards, the sound of my brothers laughing down the hall, like nothing had ever happened. Like I didn't exist. And I made a promise to myself. I would get out. Someday, some way, I would leave this house. I would survive it. And I'd never ever let anyone call me too sensitive again. There's a strange thing that happens when you live with pain too long. It becomes part of the wallpaper. You learn where to step to avoid the creaking boards. You time your breath so your crying doesn't echo down the hallway. You get good at silence. But silence has a cost, and one night I paid it. It was November 1961. The last of the leaves had fallen and frost kissed the windows each morning. Daddy was back home for a short while, a rare thing. He'd hurt his back unloading crates in Kentucky and had been given 2 weeks off to recover. He spent most of his days sleeping in the recliner with a heating pad and a bottle of bourbon nearby. Mama stayed busy. When she wasn't cooking or tending to Daddy, she was crocheting scarves for the church bazaar. Anything, I think, to keep her hands from shaking. And me, I was nearly 11, and I had become an expert at vanishing. I'd sneak out the back door and hide in the corn shed. Sometimes I'd crawl under the porch with my sketchbook and draw pictures of what I imagined other girls' homes looked like, ones where daddies were always home and brothers read you bedtime stories instead of nightmares. But that night, something in the air was different. The wind was sharp, whistling through the cracks in the wood like a warning. And Mama, for the first time in weeks, left the house after dinner. "I'm going to check on Miss Agnes down the road," she said, slipping her shawl over her thin shoulders. "She hasn't been to church in 3 Sundays?" Daddy grunted from the recliner. The twins were playing cards at the kitchen table. Harold was nowhere to be seen. And Dean was watching me. His stare made my stomach twist. "I'll be back before 10, Mama said. Ellie, help your brothers with the dishes." My throat closed up. "Please don't leave. Say something." But I didn't. Because good girls don't talk back. Because broken girls don't have voices. Mama closed the door and the house fell quiet. Too quiet. Dean set down his soda. "Well," he said, smiling without warmth, "looks like we've got the place to ourselves." Carl looked up from the table, expression unreadable. "Maybe we should just go to bed," he muttered. But Dean ignored him. "Come sit, Ellie," he said, patting the cushion beside him on the sofa. "Let's catch up." I backed away toward the stairs. My legs were trembling. I've got homework." Dean stood slowly, blocking the staircase. "You always got excuses lately." That's when I heard it, the sound that would save my life. A knock, then another. Loud, firm, urgent. The front door creaked open before anyone could stop it. And there he was, Sheriff Ray Grafton, 6'4", wide shoulders, a black Stetson that looked more worn than official. He stood in the doorway with his boots caked in dirt and a scowl on his sunburned face. "Evening, boys," he said, eyes scanning the room. Then his gaze landed on me. "Eleanor May Hart." I nodded, frozen. "Your teacher called my office," he said, stepping inside uninvited. "Said you've been missing school. Said you looked unwell last time she saw you." Dean scoffed. "We're all just fine, Sheriff. Ain't no reason to bother us at home." Sheriff Grafton didn't even glance his way. He looked straight at me. "Ellie, how about you take a walk with me down the road? Just need to talk is all." Dean took a step forward. "She ain't going nowhere." That's when Grafton drew his eyes slow, like he was giving Dean a chance to regret breathing. "Are you telling me I can't speak with a minor I was called to check on?" Dean clenched his jaw but stepped back. The room crackled with tension. I stood still, afraid to move, afraid to speak. Then Grafton held out his hand to me. I took it. And for the first time in nearly 2 years, I felt the faintest flicker of safety. We walked down the gravel path toward the county road. The stars were out, silver dust scattered across a black velvet sky. I didn't say anything, just kept my eyes on the tips of my scuffed shoes. He didn't push. Not right away. "You like your teacher, Miss Hattie?" he asked, voice low. I nodded. "She says you used to be her best reader, always first to raise your hand." My throat tightened. "She also says you don't look like you sleep much anymore. Or eat." I blinked fast. He stopped walking, turned toward me. "You want to tell me what's going on at home?" I looked up at him. His face wasn't soft, but it wasn't cruel. It was carved from the kind of life that sees things others ignore, that recognizes the tremble of a girl who spent too long pretending. I opened my mouth to speak, and nothing came out. Not a word, not a whisper, just tears. They spilled without warning, hot and heavy down my cheeks. I tried to wipe them away, but they kept coming. For the first time, someone saw me and it cracked me wide open. Sheriff Grafton didn't say a word, just stood beside me in the cold and waited. When the tears stopped, he pulled a handkerchief from his coat. Clean, folded. "Take your time," he said, handing it over. "I got all night." That night was the beginning, not of justice, not of escape, but of watching eyes, because Grafton didn't leave me alone after that. Every week he'd pass by our house on patrol. Sometimes he'd ask how school was going. Sometimes he'd talk about weather, but always he watched. The boys noticed. They backed off some. The house stayed quiet for a while. But fear doesn't just vanish, and silence doesn't erase what's already been done. Still, I had hope again, a sliver, a thread, and that was more than I'd had in years. One night, Mama came into my room while I was brushing my hair. She stood at the doorway like a ghost. "You been talking to the sheriff?" she said. I nodded, my hands trembling. Her face was unreadable. "I told you once, Ellie," she said, her voice like steel wrapped in silk. "Sometimes it's better not to stir mud that's already settled." I stared at her in disbelief. She knew. She knew, and still. "You're my mother," I whispered. "Why won't you help me?" She didn't flinch, didn't cry, just turned and left. That was the night I stopped believing she'd ever save me, and started planning how to save myself. I made a list. In a journal I kept hidden under the floorboard, I wrote 3 things. 1, get out. 2, never go back. 3, tell the truth someday. Each morning I whispered them like a prayer. They were my armor, my map, and I held onto them like lifelines. 2 months later, a church woman named Miss Wilma offered me a job sweeping floors after Sunday service. "You're a good girl," she said. "I can tell." That $1 a week she paid me. It went into a coffee tin I buried behind the chicken coop. A little escape fund, my ticket out. Even if it took me years, even if I had to crawl. Because that night the wind changed. Something shifted in me too. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was watching, waiting, planning. The day I left wouldn't come for a long while. But from that moment forward, I knew I would. There was a clock in the hallway of our old house. It hung crooked on the wood-paneled wall between my brother's room and the kitchen. The tick was uneven, too loud, too slow. It used to lull me to sleep when I was little, like a lullaby from the bones of the house. But after everything changed, it became a countdown. To the next noise, to the next absence, to the next moment my skin would crawl. That clock ticked through every day I had to stay in that house. Every lie, every bruise, every time someone looked at me and didn't see. I began to hate that sound. It mocked me. It knew. By the time I was 12, I had become 2 people. At church, I was polite, shy, always offering to help with dishes or sweep the vestibule. At home, I was invisible. The boys mostly ignored me now, but it wasn't mercy. It was fear. Sheriff Grafton's shadow had stretched long over our household. No more late-night footsteps. No more corners dark with cruelty. But the damage had been done. And Mama, she still looked through me like I was someone else's child. Sometimes I caught her watching me when I stirred the gravy or folded towels. Her eyes would soften just for a second, then harden like a pond before winter. One morning in the middle of a hard frost, Daddy came home unannounced. He'd been working 3 states overhauling timber. When the front door opened and I heard the gravel in his voice call, "Ellie girl," something in me cracked. I ran to him. He smelled like diesel and pipe smoke, just like always. And when he hugged me, I was 10 years old again and safe for all of 5 seconds. "You've gotten taller," he said, touzling my hair. I nodded, swallowing everything I wanted to scream. "Your mama says you're doing good in school." "I try." He crouched to my eye level, a rare thing. "You all right, Ellie? You eat and sleepin' okay?" I hesitated. For half a second, I thought I might tell him. Might open my mouth and pour everything out. But Mama walked in just then, her voice sharp. "She's fine, Roy. We're all fine. You want coffee?" And just like that, the door slammed shut again. That night, I sat on the porch swing with my knees pulled up to my chest. Daddy was inside laughing with the boys. Mama was boiling potatoes. And I was still a ghost. I thought about my list. Get out, never go back, tell the truth someday. Someday felt so far away. A week after Daddy's visit, Miss Wilma gave me a second job, cleaning her guest cottage out by the lake. "I'll pay you $2 a week for that," she said, "and you can keep any books you find in the attic. Lord knows I'll never read 'em." It was like she handed me a key to a second world. The cottage was small, just 1 room and a screened porch. But to me, it was a castle. I cleaned every inch, then sat on the floor and read for hours. There were stories of girls who ran away women who built empires, quiet mothers who changed the world without raising their voices. It planted something in me, a quiet knowing that I could leave, that the world didn't end at our gravel road, that my body didn't belong to the past forever. But plans need patience, and I was still a child with nowhere to go. So I waited, and every night I lay in bed and listened to that crooked clock tick its way through my fear. One night I couldn't take it anymore. I pulled the chair from the kitchen and climbed up. I took the clock down and removed the batteries. The silence that followed was deafening. Mama saw the empty hook the next morning. "Where's the clock?" "It broke," I said. She didn't ask further. She didn't care. But I did. That small act silencing that sound, it was the first thing I'd done just for me in years. Spring came late that year, but it came. With it, so did the letter. I found it in our mailbox, thin envelope, no return address. My name scribbled in a nervous hand. I opened it behind the barn. It was from Robert, the youngest brother. He'd moved out the year before to live with cousins in another county. Nobody talked about him. Mama said he'd gotten himself into some trouble, but never explained. Inside the envelope was a single page scrawled in messy pencil. "Ellie, I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't think I deserve it, but I'm sorry. I should have stopped them. I should have told Daddy. I'm sorry I didn't protect you. Rob." I stared at that note for what felt like hours. Then I burned it behind the shed. I didn't want sorry. I wanted justice. And that word, that feeling, it was growing inside me like a storm. In June, the wind changed again. Dean got arrested for stealing a truck from Mr. Beasley's feed store. He claimed it was a prank, but they held him in county lockup for 2 nights. When he came back, he was meaner. "Everyone's watching me like I'm a criminal," he growled one night at dinner. I didn't speak, but I felt something different in my bones. They weren't untouchable anymore. 2 weeks later, I saw Sheriff Grafton at the gas station. He tipped his hat. "You hanging in there, Eleanor?" I nodded. Then something bold took hold of me, something from the parts of me that had grown tougher in silence. "Sheriff," I said, "can I ask you something?" He raised a brow. "Course. If someone did something wrong to you but they were family and nobody believed you, what would you do?" His eyes narrowed. "Well," he said slowly, "I'd start by telling someone who would believe me, even if it tore everything apart." He studied me. "Sometimes you gotta tear down the rotten beams to save the house, sweetheart." That night, I took out my journal. I flipped past pages of fear and sadness, and I started a new list. 1. Find someone safe. 2. Speak the truth. 3. Begin again. The old list had kept me alive, but this new one, it would set me free. I don't remember what woke me that night. Maybe it was the wind. Maybe it was the way the walls sometimes groaned like they carried too many secrets. Or maybe it was something more, the sense that tonight would be different. That something had shifted, even if I couldn't name it yet. What I do remember, clear as a photograph burned into my mind, is this. The barn light was still on, and that had never happened before. Our family barn was barely more than a skeleton. The red paint had faded to rust, and the roof sagged like tired shoulders. But Daddy kept a single bulb strung from the rafters, an old fixture with a pull chain that flickered when it rained. We were taught that light goes off when the sun goes down. always. So when I saw it glowing from my bedroom window, cold panic crawled up my spine. I pressed my face to the glass. The yard was still, no wind, no crickets, just the hum of that lonely bulb, and a shadow moving across the dirt. I slipped out of bed and crept down the stairs, my bare feet soundless on the wood. I didn't know what I was doing. I only knew I couldn't ignore it. At the back door, I hesitated. The night smelled like rain and secrets. I opened it just wide enough to slip through. The barn loomed in the darkness like a shipwreck. And that light, it flickered again. Once, twice, then held steady. I took a step forward. And then another, until I was close enough to hear voices, Dean and Harold, arguing, low, sharp whispers. I pressed myself against the side wall and held my breath. "You got the sheriff sniffing around like a bloodhound," Harold hissed. I didn't say nothing. Dean shot back. "You think I want him here? He's watching you. He's watching all of us, because she won't shut up." A pause. "You think she's talking?" Harold asked, voice colder now. Dean's answer was a curse under his breath. "She's thinking about it. That's enough." Silence. Then a scrape boots on gravel, closer. "She's gonna ruin everything," Harold muttered. "Mama's been praying day and night. Said she'd kill herself before she lets this family fall apart." Dean spat. "Mama can rot." I flinched. "You know what we should do," Harold started, but I didn't hear the rest. Because I was already running. Back through the yard, past the swing, through the door I didn't dare slam. Back to my room, and under the blanket I lay shaking. Not because they were watching me, but because I'd finally heard the truth. They were afraid of me, and I would use that. The next morning I left early for school. I didn't say goodbye, didn't pack lunch, just tucked my journal under my sweater and walked the 2 miles to town with a stone in my gut and steel in my spine. Sheriff Grafton's office sat across from the post office, a modest brick building with 2 barred windows and a metal bench out front. He was there, drinking coffee from a chipped mug, scanning the paper. When he saw me, he stood. "Eleanor, I need to talk," I said, "now." He led me inside, and I told him. Everything. It took nearly 2 hours. I started from the beginning, from the princess dress and the porch swing, all the way to the barn light that never went out. I showed him my journal, the pages, the drawings, the names. I didn't cry, not once. When I finished, he was quiet, not disbelieving, not shocked, just sad, like he'd seen this before and hoped he never would again. "Ellie," he said softly, "I believe you." And that's when I cried, because no one had said that to me in my entire life. What happened next moved like slow thunder. Sheriff Grafton didn't storm our house with handcuffs. He didn't drag my brothers out by their ears. He did something smarter. He opened a case file. He brought in a county social worker named Miss Clara, a sturdy woman with cropped hair and sad eyes. She visited our home under the guise of routine welfare checks. She interviewed Mama in the kitchen, the boys on the porch. Me she took to the backyard. We sat on overturned buckets beneath the elm tree. "Do you feel safe here, Eleanor?" she asked. "No," I said. "Just that." "No." Within a week, the state sent a letter. I had a choice. A safe house in Chattanooga, or placement with extended relatives in North Carolina. I asked if Miss Wilma could take me, but she was too old. The rules said I needed a legal guardian under 65, so I chose Chattanooga. And on a gray Tuesday morning with 1 duffel bag and my hidden coffee tin of coins, I left. No one hugged me goodbye. No one stopped me. Mama didn't come out of her room. Dean just stared at the floor. And Harold. Harold said nothing at all, but I felt their stares burn holes in my back. The bus ride was long. I watched pine trees blur into telephone poles. I clutched my bag like it held my whole soul. When the city came into view, wide streets, real sidewalks, people who didn't know my name, I exhaled. I hadn't realized I'd been holding my breath since I was 6 years old. The safe house wasn't glamorous. 2 bunk beds to a room, chipped linoleum floors, a woman named Joyce who smelled like cigarettes and vanilla wafers. But it was safe. No fists, no footsteps in the dark, no barn lights, and that alone made it feel like a palace. In the evenings, I wrote. I wrote letters I never mailed. To Mama, to the little girl I used to be. To God, though I wasn't sure if he still listened. And slowly I began to rebuild. Not loudly, not with grand gestures, but in quiet ways. Reading library books, folding laundry, laughing at something small and stupid, and really sleeping for the first time in years. But healing doesn't erase history. It just gives you room to breathe beside it. One night, Joyce asked if I wanted to help cook Sunday dinner for the house. She handed me a recipe card with smudged handwriting. Pot roast. I'd never made one before. I asked her what happens if I mess it up. She smiled. Then we eat cereal and laugh about it. That was the moment I knew I'd stepped into a new world. A world where mistakes didn't earn bruises. Where adults didn't vanish behind locked doors. Where clocks still ticked but not like bombs. That dinner, it was the first time I sat at a table and felt like I belonged. Not because I was needed or feared, but because I was wanted, because I mattered. And somewhere far away in a barn filled with shadows, the light finally went out. You'd think that once you escape a burning house, you'd feel relief. But what they don't tell you is how long the smoke stays in your lungs. Even after the fire is out, even after you're safe. I was 14, living in a group home full of other girls with stories like mine, each one stitched together with fierce silence and the stubborn thread of survival. We didn't talk much about the past, not at first. But at night, when the wind howled outside and the house creaked like old bones, we'd lie awake and whisper across bunk beds. Did yours yell? Did yours drink? Did anyone ever believe you? Sometimes we'd answer. Sometimes we'd just nod. Sometimes we'd cry into the pillow so nobody would have to feel ashamed for hearing it. I met Georgia that fall. She was 17, sharp-tongued and street-smart with knuckles that had clearly hit more than just doors. But she was kind to me, gently. The way a cat nudges your leg without asking for anything in return. You look like a ghost, she said one morning while brushing her hair. No offense. None taken. You eat like one too, skin and bones, I shrugged. Want half my sandwich at lunch? I nodded. And just like that, we became something fragile and real. Georgia had a way of filling silence without drowning in it. She taught me how to braid hair, sneak extra soap from the office closet, and use sarcasm like armor. She also taught me how to breathe. Try this, she said one night when I couldn't sleep. Close your eyes, breathe in 4 counts, hold it, then out for 4. I tried. It felt stupid. But after the 3rd time, something loosened in my chest. You're not going to die, Eleanor, she said. You just think you will. That's what trauma does. I didn't know what trauma meant then, but I knew she was right. School in Chattanooga was different. Bigger. Louder. Teachers didn't look at me like I was a burden. They just saw a quiet girl in the 2nd row who turned in her homework on time and never raised her voice. Mr. Daniels, my English teacher, noticed I always read ahead. One day he handed me a book after class. To Kill a Mockingbird. Scout reminded me of you, he said. Fierce even when you whisper. I read it twice, then started writing my own stories in the margins of my notebook. Stories about girls who ran, girls who fought back, girls who built homes out of their own rib cages and dared anyone to knock. It was the first time I wrote not to survive, but to feel alive. One afternoon, I caught Joyce watching me at the dinner table. You're starting to come back to life, she said. I didn't know I was gone, I replied. You were, but you're blooming now. That word blooming struck something in me. Not like a fire, like rain. At the end of that year, Georgia turned 18. She packed her bag and left without ceremony. Left me a note on my pillow. Don't stop breathing, Ellie. Don't stop writing either. You've got a story the world needs, and you're stronger than you think. I kept that note tucked in my journal for decades. She was the first person who told me I mattered without needing anything in return. By 15, I was allowed weekend library passes. Those were my sacred hours. I'd sit in the sunniest corner with books stacked high, pages turning like prayer. One day, I found a battered copy of a poetry collection by Mary Oliver. One line burned itself into my chest. Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life? I didn't know yet, but I knew I wanted to be more than a survivor. I wanted to be whole. That summer, something unexpected happened. A local volunteer program partnered with the home offering part-time work to girls with high academic marks. The job, helping out at the county hospital library. I filed patient charts, dusted bookshelves, and handed out magazines to elderly patients with trembling hands. It was quiet, safe, and oddly beautiful. There was a woman named Ruth who visited her husband every day in the cancer ward. She always wore a scarf around her head and brought crossword puzzles for him. One day she offered me half a muffin. You remind me of my niece, she said. She quiet too? No, but she carried storms in her bones just like you. I didn't know what to say, so I said thank you. I began to realize I wasn't the only one walking around with broken pieces. The world was full of us. People who looked normal on the outside but were patched up with tape and prayer on the inside. And that made me feel less alone. At 16, I took the GED early. Passed with honors. Joyce cried. She hugged me so tight I thought my ribs would snap, not from pain, but from finally being held. Real held, not the kind that demanded something back. Around that time, I was offered something I never expected. A chance to move in with a foster family. The Carsons, a couple in their 50s who had raised 3 boys and wanted to pay it forward. I was terrified. The idea of calling someone mom again felt like trespassing on a grave. But I said yes, because staying still felt like surrender. The Carsons lived in a modest house with blue shutters and a cherry tree in the front yard. Mrs. Carson made tea every evening and asked how my day was, even if I didn't answer. Mr. Carson fixed bikes in the garage and always left the porch light on. They didn't try to erase my past. They just made space for a future. One night after dinner, Mrs. Carson handed me a gift, a journal with a leather cover. I thought maybe you'd want something new, she said, a place for the chapters that come next. I cried holding it. Not because I was sad, but because someone believed I had a next chapter. That fall, I applied to community college. English major. I wrote an essay about a barn light that stayed on too long, and a girl who turned it off forever. I got accepted, on partial scholarship. Joyce framed the letter. I wasn't healed. Not fully. Some days I still woke up panicked, expecting the walls to close in. But those days got fewer, and the good days, the peaceful ones, started stringing themselves together like beads on a bracelet. Tiny moments of color in a life that had once been nothing but gray. And one day I looked in the mirror and saw something I hadn't in years. Not just the girl who survived, but the woman becoming. It began with one letter. Folded in half, unsent, tucked beneath my mattress like a secret I wasn't ready to bury, but couldn't quite let go of either. Dear Mama, did you ever miss me? Not my chores, not the meals I cooked or the clothes I washed, but me. The girl who used to sing while sweeping, the one who sat on the porch and imagined a whole world past that field. Was there ever a moment you looked out the window and wondered what became of your daughter? Or did you just pray harder that no one asked too many questions? I'm not writing to hurt you. I just want to understand. Why didn't you stop them? Why didn't you save me? I didn't sign it. Didn't put a date. Just folded it shut and whispered a prayer over it when I wasn't even sure I meant. I was 17, living in the Carsons' guest room, starting community college, working part-time at the hospital library, reading too many books with endings that tied everything up neatly. But life doesn't tie up. Not like that. It frays. It tangles. It spills. And some parts never get sewn back the way you want them to. Every Sunday night after dinner, I wrote another letter. Never mailed. Never meant to. To Dean, to Harold, to the little girl I used to be. Sometimes just to God. They weren't about blame anymore. They were about truth. Raw and aching. A way to speak what had lived unspoken for too long. Dear Dean, I used to think you were a monster. But monsters don't cry when they think no one's watching. I saw you once behind the barn punching the wall like it had answers. Were you angry at me or at what was done to you too? I don't forgive you, but I don't hate you either. I'm letting you go because I can't carry both your shame and mine. Dear little Eleanor, you didn't imagine it. You weren't too sensitive. You didn't deserve it. You were brave, even when you were terrified. And one day long from now, you'll become someone who survives for both of us. You'll speak. You'll breathe. You'll write. And you'll bloom in places no one expected. The letters became part of my ritual. Write, fold, store them in a worn shoebox under my bed. Over time, the shoebox filled. And oddly as it filled, I began to feel lighter. There was a moment, maybe 6 months into college, when I realized I hadn't had a night terror in over 3 weeks. No barn lights, no ghost footsteps, no waking up with my mouth open mid-scream. Just silence and dreams, some about books, some about running, some about nothing at all, and that silence. It was the most precious sound I'd ever known. Professor Avery was my literature professor, mid-60s, silver hair like storm clouds. He had a way of reading poetry like it mattered more than math or money or war. He noticed my writing, not just my essays, but the things I scribbled in the margins. One afternoon, he called me into his office. There's something in you, he said, a voice that knows pain but doesn't let it win. I blinked. He handed me a flyer, creative writing workshop. Saturday mornings, open to first years, no grades, just space. I signed up before I could talk myself out of it. The first time I read aloud one of my letters, my hands shook so badly I couldn't hold the page straight. It wasn't even the most graphic one. It was a simple letter to God, but saying it out loud made my mouth dry and my throat burn. When I finished, no one clapped. They didn't need to. The silence that followed was so full it felt like something sacred. And then one girl, Anna, whispered, "Thank you." Something changed in me that day. I started seeing my pain not as a curse, but as a bridge. A way to reach others still stranded on their own islands of silence. We were all writing letters, just in different forms. It wasn't therapy, not in the formal sense, but it was healing. One story at a time. Around that time, I began to consider something terrifying. What if one day I did send one? Not all of them. Not the worst, but maybe one letter. One truth to someone who needed to hear it. Not for justice, not for revenge, but to say I see you, and maybe just maybe to hear it back. But first I had to send one to myself. So I wrote a letter, signed it, stamped it, mailed it to my new address, the Carson's house with the cherry tree and porch light. When it arrived 2 days later, I opened it slowly, as if I'd forgotten what I'd written. Dear Eleanor, you have made it further than anyone ever thought you could. You are not ruined. You are not a burden. You are a beginning. Love me. That night, I lit a candle, read the letter by its soft glow, and cried, not because I was broken, but because I was finally starting to believe that I wasn't. And the shoebox, it stayed under my bed, still full of the unsent, but now also holding hope. I didn't believe in love. Not the kind people wrote about in paperbacks or sang about on radios. Certainly not the kind that lasted. The only love I had ever known came with strings, with silence, with shadows. So when I met James, I did what I always did with good things. I prepared to lose him, before he even had the chance to stay. We met on a Thursday. I remember because I was shelving books in the hospital library, and he came in looking for something by Hemingway, which in hindsight was both predictable and oddly charming. He had dark curls tucked under a navy beanie, worn boots, and hands that looked like they'd built things. Do you have The Old Man in the Sea? He asked, his voice calm like a front porch evening. I raised an eyebrow. We have about 3 copies. It's a hospital library, not a desert island. He grinned. Guess I'm not the first to ask. Not even the first today. He stayed to talk. About books, about his grandfather's fishing trips, about the way pain makes you grow in strange directions. I didn't offer much back, but he didn't seem to mind the silence. In fact, he treated it like it was part of the conversation. Over the next few weeks, he returned, always with a book in hand. Sometimes reading, sometimes not. Sometimes just sitting across the table, sipping hospital coffee and watching the rain through the windows. Why do you like it here? I asked once. He didn't answer right away. Then because it's quiet in a world that's too loud, and because you're here. I froze, but he didn't press. Didn't corner me with sweetness. Just smiled like he knew how easily I could vanish and was willing to wait anyway. I wasn't used to that kind of waiting. I was used to being chased, used, dismissed, not seen, not respected, not valued. So I started testing him. Not on purpose. It was muscle memory. Some days I'd go cold, withdraw, avoid his eyes, say nothing when he arrived. He never pushed. Just left a cup of tea on the table and read quietly until I was ready to thaw. Sometimes he'd leave a note in the book spine before heading out. I'll see you when you're ready. Page 87 made me think of you. You don't have to speak to be understood. It felt like falling through water. Terrifying, silent, weightless, and then suddenly warm. The first time he reached for my hand, I almost pulled away. Not because I didn't want it, but because I did. Because my body didn't know what safety felt like. Because touch had always meant something was about to break. But his fingers were steady. He didn't grip. He offered, like an invitation with no obligation. And when I laced mine with his, nothing shattered. Nothing burned. Nothing demanded I give up any part of myself to keep the moment. It just was. We started walking together after work, down side streets lined with dogwoods. He told me about his father's heart attack, about growing up too fast, about the first time he saw someone die and how it made him question everything he believed. And one night under a soft orange sky, he asked about me. Not directly, just a quiet, was it bad where you came from? I looked at my feet, then up at the clouds, and whispered worse. He nodded, didn't ask more. Didn't need me to unwrap it all for his understanding. Just held my hand tighter. That silence said more than any answer could. A few weeks later, he kissed me. It was soft. No fireworks, just something sure. Like a door opening you didn't know was unlocked. I wanted to cry. Not because I was sad, but because I didn't flinch. Because for the first time I felt a kiss that didn't ask me to disappear. That asked me instead to be there. Fully, present, whole. And that terrified me. Because I didn't know how to love without preparing for loss. Didn't know how to hold joy without bracing for the fall. So I did what scared girls do when something's too good. I pulled away. I stopped answering calls. Avoided the library on days he might visit. Told Joyce I was just tired when she asked what was wrong. I told myself I was protecting him. But really I was protecting me. From hope. From the vulnerability of being known. Because if he knew the whole story, would he still stay? Would anyone? 3 days passed. Then 4. Then a week. And then I found a letter in my mailbox. No return address. Just my name. Inside. Dear Eleanor, I don't need all the pages at once. You don't owe me your story like it's a toll to be paid. I don't love you because you're unbroken. I love you because you survived. And I'll wait as long as you need. I just hope you let me. Always. I read it 5 times before I let myself believe it was real. That love could be soft. that someone could love me without needing to save me first. And then I did something bold. I wrote back, "Dear James, I don't know how to be loved like this, but I want to learn. And if you'll walk slowly, I'll walk beside you." That evening, I met him at our old bench by the library. I sat down, said nothing, just reached for his hand. And when he smiled and laced our fingers together, I didn't brace for pain. I just breathed. They say love doesn't heal everything. And they're right. But the right love, it gives you permission to heal yourself. It holds space. It reminds you you are more than what happened to you. And in James's quiet presence, I began to believe that maybe, just maybe, I wasn't broken after all. I was just becoming. I told myself I'd never go back. That once I crossed the county line and left those fields behind, I'd erase the entire town like chalk on a rain-washed sidewalk. But healing is funny like that. It doesn't just want closure, it wants confrontation, not with rage, but with truth. So on a mild September morning, with the leaves just beginning to bronze and curl, I packed an overnight bag, tucked James's letter in my coat pocket, and drove home. If I could even call it that. The town hadn't changed much. Still just one blinking traffic light and a diner that smelled like burnt bacon. Still the same peeling white paint on the church, the same names carved into the wooden bus stop bench. Still his truck, or one like it, parked outside a rusted hardware store. But I had changed, and I wasn't that girl anymore. I drove past my old school, the rusting fence out front sagging like tired shoulders. Past the corner where Dean once grabbed my arm so hard I couldn't write for a week. Past the field where I first imagined escape. And then I saw it. The house. Half slumped under the weight of time. Weeds like grief curling around the porch. The barn out back tilting like a drunk memory. I parked down the road. Sat there a while with my hands gripping the steering wheel like it was the only thing holding me in this life. Then I got out. Each step toward that house felt like stepping into a dream, the kind that makes your teeth ache and your voice vanish. But I didn't turn back. I needed to see it. Not for nostalgia, not even for justice. But to remind myself that I had outlived it. That I had become beyond it. The front door was still painted red. I knocked. Once. Twice. Nothing. So I stepped back, circled the house, and peered through the kitchen window. And there she was. Mama? Older, thinner, her once black hair streaked with threads of gray, washing dishes like she had every night of my childhood. Like the world hadn't split wide open and left a scar where a daughter used to be. I didn't knock again. I just stood there watching her back as she scrubbed a glass in slow circles, until as if sensing me through the glass, she turned and froze. For a moment, neither of us moved. The years stretched between us like a frozen rope. I raised my hand, not a wave, just a gesture, a hello that ached in my wrist. She didn't smile, didn't cry, just stared. Then slowly she opened the door. Eleanor, she said like the name had dust on it. Mama. We stood there. The porch sagged beneath us, and all the words I'd rehearsed vanished. I wasn't sure you were still alive, she said after a while, voice rasping like old leaves. Some days I wasn't either, I replied. Silence. Then you look well. I am. She stepped aside. An invitation. I hesitated, then crossed the threshold into the house that had both raised me and wrecked me. The kitchen smelled the same. Grease, soap, regret. There was a moment I thought I might collapse, fall to my knees and scream at the wallpaper, the chair, the dent in the door from when Dean threw a bottle. But I stayed upright, because I wasn't here to bleed. I was here to bear witness. We sat. She poured tea like it was any normal day, and when I reached for the cup, my hands didn't shake. That felt like victory. I heard about Dean, I said. She flinched. Cancer, liver, gone 2 years now. I didn't feel anything. Not relief, not joy, just absence. An open window where a storm used to live. I wasn't kind to you, she whispered. I waited. Let her sit with the truth of it. I didn't protect you. Still, I said nothing. I was afraid. Now I looked at her. Of him. Yes, and of what would happen if anyone knew what it said about me. I felt something then. A small, fierce anger, but it was never about you. She nodded, tears gathering in her eyes. I know that now, but back then I just wanted to survive. I studied her face. She looked tired, haunted, but not cruel. Maybe she never had been, maybe just weak. I wrote you letters, I said, hundreds. She looked up. I never sent them, but they helped me remember that I still had a voice. She reached across the table. Didn't touch me, just opened her palm. And in a gesture so small, so tentative, I saw something I hadn't seen since I was 7. Hope. I don't expect forgiveness, she said. I don't know if I have it to give, I replied. Silence again, but not hostile. Just 2 women sitting with the ruins of something they couldn't rebuild, but might plant over. When I stood to leave, she followed me to the porch. I think of you every morning, she said. I know. She looked down at her hands. I'm glad you came back. I didn't say me too. But I was. Not because it fixed anything, but because I left with my head high, and the knowledge that I had faced the place of my undoing, and did not unravel. I drove back as the sun dipped low, painting the sky with mercy. And when I got home, James met me on the porch. No questions, just a long hug that said, "Welcome home." And for the first time in decades, I believed I was. I used to avoid mirrors, not out of vanity, but because they told the truth too plainly. The scar above my eyebrow, the slight stoop in my left shoulder, the tiredness around the eyes that no amount of sleep could erase. Mirrors held up what I wasn't ready to see. That time had passed. That the girl who once dreamed of running had become a woman still learning to stay. But now I look, not every day, but often enough to make peace with the face that greets me. There's something humbling about watching yourself age. The skin softening, the lines deepening, but instead of resenting the changes I've started, thanking them. Every crease has a name, the ones near my mouth. From laughter I never thought I'd taste again. The one between my brows born of sleepless nights that taught me strength. The silver strands in my hair earned through years no one thought I'd survive. I keep a photo of myself at 17 tucked in the corner of the mirror. Not to mourn her, but to honor her. She fought like hell, and now I live for both of us. Some mornings I light a candle, not for prayer, not for ritual, just to sit beside myself, to say, "You're still here, and that is not nothing." James and I never married, he asked once. On a picnic blanket beneath a cotton sky. I smiled, touched his cheek, and said I already feel chosen. He understood. He always does. We built a life without the ceremony. A home with books stacked like bricks. With tea always brewing. With silence that doesn't ache. And I began to write. Not just letters this time, but stories. Of women who survived, who got old, who forgave without forgetting, who found beauty in their own becoming. One of my short stories was published in a local magazine. The editor sent me a note. "Your words feel like a hand on the shoulder." I cried when I read that, because for years I had needed that hand. Now I got to be it for someone else. Last spring, a college reached out. They'd read my essays, invited me to speak on trauma and storytelling. I stood at that podium, hand steady, voice clear, and said, "You are not a burden. You are the beginning." Afterward, a young girl came up to me, maybe 20, eyes wide with unshed questions. She didn't say much, just hugged me and whispered, "Thank you for surviving." I held her tightly because I knew what it meant to need a future you couldn't picture and to find it in someone else's voice. I've started leading workshops. Women mostly, some in their 30s, some with gray hair and soft hands. We write letters we never send. We name our scars. We practice saying our own names like they're poems, not apologies. One woman, Miriam, once read aloud a letter to her mother, voice trembling, hands clutching the page like it might disappear. Afterward, she asked, "What if healing makes me a stranger to my family?" I said, "Then you bless yourself with the kind of family that wants you whole." She cried. I cried. We all did. Because sometimes healing isn't neat. It's messy, lonely, brave, and it's always worth it. I don't fear aging anymore. In fact, I welcome it. Each year is another layer to my story. Another line in the poem of my life. I'm not afraid of forgetting. Because I've written it down. And not afraid of being forgotten. Because I've loved and been loved in ways that echo. Sometimes I walk past the old library. It's been renovated. Children run through it now with sticky fingers and curious eyes. I once saw a girl, maybe 8, curled up in the corner with Charlotte's Web. She looked up and smiled, and I thought she doesn't know how much I fought to be here to see her smile. But I do, and that's enough. At night I light a candle and sit by the window. James hums in the kitchen. There's a blanket across my knees, and peace in my chest, not because everything is perfect, but because I no longer require it to be. And when I look in the mirror now, I say, "You are the woman you needed when you were a girl. You made it. And you made it matter." I've always believed that everyone leaves behind a story. Some carve theirs in stone, some whisper it into the wind. And some, like me, write it in the quiet moments on grocery lists, between book pages, in the space between a question and the courage to answer it honestly. This is mine. I don't need a eulogy, or flowers, or a polished speech that smooths over the cracks. Let the cracks show. They're where the light got in. Where I stopped being a victim and became an author. James once asked me, if you could go back, change it all, would you? We were sitting in the garden, hands speckled with dirt and time. I thought about that question for a long time. And then I said no, because then I wouldn't have met me. He smiled, kissed my hand, said that's the bravest answer I've ever heard. Bravery used to mean running away. Now it means staying, waking up in my own skin every morning and saying, Yes, again, I choose to live again. I wrote my will last winter. Nothing fancy. A few donations to the women's shelter, some books to the local library. The house, this quiet, sunlit house to a young woman named Nia, who's aging out of foster care and wants to be a writer. She came over last week, nervous eyes scanning the shelves like she was trying to memorize every title. I told her you don't have to memorize them. You get to add to them. She cried. So did I. I hope she fills this place with laughter, and tea, and poems on the walls. To my son, the child I raised after leaving home, I leave my journals. He once told me, "Mom, you're the strongest person I know." And I laughed because I didn't always feel strong. I still don't. But strength isn't noise. It's not anger or sharp elbows. It's staying soft in a world that tried to make you small. To anyone who ever reads my words long after I'm gone, I want you to know you don't have to be perfect to be worth loving. You don't need to have all the answers to begin again. You don't even need to feel brave to take the next breath. You just have to show up, messy, tender, still healing. I once believed that family was the people who shared your blood. Now I know family is the people who see your wounds and don't look away. The ones who sit beside your silence, who read your letters without judgment, who believe in your voice even before you do. If you're reading this, maybe you carry something heavy too. A secret, a scar, a silence that's turned to stone. I want you to know it's not too late. To speak, to heal, to be held. In my final days, I sit by the window with a quilt across my lap and a smile that comes easily. I watch the neighborhood kids race past with popsicles and scraped knees. I watch the mailman wave and Joyce's grandson mow her lawn. I watch the world spin gently on and I feel no need to cling. Because I have lived, and more importantly, I have loved. At my bedside, there's a photo. Not of me, but of the women I've helped. The letters they've written, the circles we formed, the stories they now write without fear. That is my legacy. Not survival, but transformation. James reads to me at night now. His voice older but still calm, still safe. He pauses to tuck a blanket around my shoulders and say, "You are my favorite story." And I say I was always writing toward you. When my breath becomes slower, when my hands grow still, I don't fear the end, because my life has already been a resurrection. From silence to song, from shame to story, from girl to woman to warrior. So when they ask about me, Eleanor May Hart, tell them this. She did not live quietly. She lived like a whisper that turned into thunder. She forgave. She created. She became the woman she once needed. And she left behind a map for every girl still searching for the way home.